You would think that when your brother crawls back into your life 39 years after you buried an empty coffin with his name on it, the story should end there. But for me, that was only where it began. When I stepped off the plane with John at JFK, he clung to the handrail as if the earth itself might tilt and throw him off. The lights, the sounds, the metallic voice of the announcements in 3 languages at once, it all pressed on him. I could feel his fingers shake when he slid his hand into the crook of my elbow. "Too loud," he whispered in Spanish, the language that had become his home. "Too fast." "It slows down," I lied. "I promise." I was 60 now, grandpa age. Bad knees, an aching shoulder that still clicked out of place when I slept wrong. That same shoulder that had dislocated in the doorway of a dying plane, while my little brother's hand slipped from mine into a screaming wall of wind. He was 57. Sunburnt, wiry, his skin mapped with scars. His eyes were the same impossible blue he'd had at 18. Older, yes. Weathered, but him. My brother. On the ride back from the airport, my daughter kept trying to take pictures on her phone. Every time she lifted it, John flinched like she was pointing a gun at him. "Dad, we have to document this," Lisa said, half whisper, half whine. "People will think I'm making it up." "Put the phone down," I said quietly. "But, now Lisa," she scowled in the rearview mirror, but the phone disappeared. My grandson Eddie sat between her and my son-in-law Mark in the back seat, eyes wide, staring at John as if he'd stepped out of one of those superhero movies. "You were in the jungle?" Eddie asked. He was 11, all elbows and curiosity. "Like, really in the jungle? With snakes and everything?" "Snakes," John said, his accent thick, his English rusty from disuse. "Yes, everything." He tried to smile. It came out crooked. I should have felt only joy. Relief. A miracle, the priest had called it when I'd gone to confession 3 days earlier, clutching the letter with its bruised stamps and thin, faded ink. A miracle, after decades of nightmares, therapy that hadn't helped, guilt that settled into my bones like winter. But even in that first ride home, with my brother's shoulder pressed carefully to mine and the Manhattan skyline flashing past the windows, something oily and cold slid into my gut. It started with 8 little words, spoken lightly, as if they meant nothing at all. "So, Mark said, scratching at his expensive watch, that stainless steel thing I'd paid for 2 Christmases ago. This whole coming back from the dead situation. What does that mean for, paperwork?" "Paperwork?" I asked. "Life insurance," he said, too quickly. "And the estate. Just curious. Must be complicated, right?" John's hand tightened around the handle above the door. He understood more English than he could speak. I saw it in the way his jaw clenched. I stared at Mark's reflection in the mirror. At his easy smile, the one he used on clients and waiters he wanted to impress. My daughter stared straight ahead, pretending not to hear. That was the first time I felt it, that prickle at the back of my neck that told me joy would not be the only thing that followed my brother home. It took us 3 months to restore his citizenship. The DNA test came back with numbers and percentages that boiled down to a single sentence. Biological full sibling. The embassy paperwork, the affidavits from the villagers who'd raised him, my own trembling signature on a dozen forms. Together, they pulled him across borders that had never mattered in the jungle. He moved into the spare room of my house, the room that used to be my wife's sewing room before cancer took her. I packed away the boxes of fabric and the old Singer machine myself. My granddaughter Emma helped, her small hands folding cloth with a gentleness I recognized from her grandmother. "Will Uncle John like it here?" she asked, standing in the doorway as I remade the bed. "I hope so," I said. "He looks like you," she said thoughtfully, "but older and younger at the same time." Out of the mouths of 12-year-olds. The first weeks were strange and fragile, a careful dance over broken glass. John learned how to use a remote control by watching Eddie. He discovered he hated microwaved food and loved hot showers. He stood for hours in front of my living room window staring at the streetlights, the passing cars, the thin trees planted in square patches of dirt along the sidewalk. "At night there, it is dark," he said once. "Only stars, and the frogs. Here." He tapped the glass where neon from the corner bodega flickered. "The sky is gone." He slept badly. I knew, because I slept badly too. Sometimes I woke to the soft thud of his footsteps in the hallway at 3 a.m, the bathroom light slice under my door. Once, I found him sitting at the kitchen table, elbows on the wood, fingers laced, eyes wet. "Dreams again?" I asked, pouring us both tea. He nodded. "The door of the plane," he said. "It opens. The wind. Your hand. Always this moment, nothing after, nothing before." "I let you go," I whispered. He shook his head sharply. "No, the plane let me go. The man who never fix it, he let me go. You." He looked at my shoulder, the one that still ached in the rain. "You hold on until the bone break." His words warmed something in me I'd kept frozen for years, but they didn't fix everything. You can't reclaim 4 lost decades with paperwork and shared meals. You can't compress a life into a file folder and a few stories told over coffee. My kids were cautious at first, polite, curious. Lisa brought meals. Roasted chicken one day, lasagna the next, store-bought apple pie presented as if she'd baked it herself. She asked John gentle questions, the kind she'd learned from watching talk shows. "Do you remember the fall?" she asked one Sunday, when the whole family was around my table for the first time with John in the empty chair that had haunted us for so long. We all froze. John's fork hovered over his plate. He looked at her, then at me. Then slowly, he set the fork down. "I remember. The wind," he said quietly. "Loud, the metal scream. Then, nothing. I wake on the ground, in the green. I cannot move, cannot speak. Only this side." He tapped his right temple, black. Emma reached out, put her hand over his. "You woke up," she said softly. "That's what matters." He smiled at her. It was the most honest smile I'd seen him give anyone. Mark poured himself more wine. "Crazy," he said. "Like something from a movie. All those years. Man, if my parents thought I was dead and I just showed up like that, they'd probably faint." "You don't have a brother," I said. "I've got a father-in-law," he said lightly, raising his glass. "Close enough. To miracles." He looked at me over the rim of his glass. There was something probing in his gaze, something measuring. I didn't like it. 2 weeks after the DNA test confirmed what my heart had known the moment I saw that grainy photo, a thick envelope arrived by certified mail. The return address made my chest tighten. Pacific American Life and Accident. 39 years earlier, after the plane had gone down and the search parties had come back empty-handed, a man in a gray suit had come to my parents' house. He had sat at our kitchen table and explained, in measured, sorry-for-your-loss tones, that there had been an accidental death policy on my brother through the adventure company's standard practice, he'd said. "We insure all participants. In the tragic event of, well, it eases the burden." The settlement they gave my parents had paid off their mortgage, my father's medical debts, the last years of my mother's life. What was left had come to me when they died, helping me buy the house where I now sat, envelope in hand, thumb pressed into the seal hard enough to blanch the nail I signed for it. Closed the door. Stared at my name typed neatly over the clear plastic window. In the living room, John was watching a documentary about cities, eyes narrowed at the aerial view of highways braided through concrete sprawl. "Everything is straight," he muttered. "The roads, the lines. It looks like a spider web with no spider." I sat beside him, the envelope heavy in my lap. "What is it?" he asked, eyes flicking from the television to the paper. "Nothing," I lied. "Just old business." I took it to my study, closed the door, opened it with hands that had tightened around steering wheels, hospital bed rails, and closed caskets, but never stopped shaking when it came to paperwork. Inside were 3 things: a letter, 7 pages of legal language, and a request for updated information. Dear Mr. Anderson, in light of recent information provided by the United States Department of State regarding the status of your brother John Anderson. I sank into my chair as the words blurred. The accidental death that had funded my parents' last years might never have been a death at all, at least not in the way the policy defined it. There would be an investigation, the letter said. A review of the claim. There was a possibility, only a possibility, they emphasized, of repayment of funds if fraud or error could be established. Fraud. Error. I laughed once, a dry, humorless sound that startled even me. I hadn't filed the claim. I had been a grieving 21-year-old with a dislocated shoulder and jungle mud still under my fingernails when the insurance man had leaned over our table and said the words beneficiary and compensation. Now I was a 60-year-old widower with adult children whose homes had been built on my stability, whose private schools had been paid from accounts seeded with that money, whose lives were knitted into the fabric of whatever fraud or error some anonymous investigator might decide had occurred. My phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Lisa. "Dad, Mark found an article. Call when you can. Important." I didn't call. Not then. Instead, I took the insurance letter, the legal documents, folded them neatly back into their envelope, and locked it in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. I told myself I'd deal with it later, after John had settled in more. After we'd built a few new memories to stand against the 40 years of absence, I told myself that my children wouldn't be thinking about money when their uncle had just risen from the grave of our family history. I was wrong. The next day, Lisa invited us over for dinner. "Bring Uncle John," she said brightly when I hesitated. "The kids want to show him their rooms. It'll be good for him. Normal." I looked at John, who was standing in the doorway, listening. He nodded once. "Okay," I said. "We'll come." Lisa lived in a 2-story colonial in the suburbs, all white siding and blue shutters, a manicured lawn, and a porch swing that had never creaked under the weight of worry. 3 years ago, when Mark's second guaranteed success startup went under, I had paid off their credit cards and quietly covered 3 months of their mortgage. When they'd needed a bigger place for the kids, I'd co-signed their new loan. They greeted us with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. "Dad," Lisa said, hugging me. She smelled like expensive perfume and stress. "Uncle John." She hesitated, then stepped in to hug him too, her arms barely touching his shoulders. Come in. The dinner was roast beef and mashed potatoes, gravy and a glass boat they'd gotten as a wedding gift. Conversation stayed polite at first. Emma proudly showed John the painting she'd made at school. Eddie peppered him with questions about snakes and jaguars. Mark waited until dessert. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair, coffee cup balanced in one hand. "Crazy coincidence, huh?" "What is?" I asked. He grinned, the grin of a man about to deliver a punchline he considered clever. "I work in insurance, remember?" he said. "I did a little digging, Pacific American. They're ruthless. They don't just let things like this go." Lisa shot him a warning look. "Mark, no, he said. "They need to know. We're family. We need to plan." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "What did you dig?" I asked. He set the cup down, laced his fingers. "Well," he said, "turns out, when your brother supposedly died, the claim was a big one. Policy was substantial. And now that he's very much not dead," he gestured toward John, who was watching him with narrowed eyes, "the company's on the hook. They're talking about clawbacks, legal action, all that. Eddie rolled his eyes. Dad, we're not in one of your meetings. Mark ignored him. What I'm saying is, Dad, if they decide there was fraud or error, that's the phrase they use, you might have to pay back everything principal. Interest, maybe even penalties. It could wipe you out. The room seemed to tilt for a moment. What are you talking about? Lisa hissed. He shrugged. I'm just being realistic. We need to think ahead. Protect the house, the kids, our future. Protect them from what? I asked. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. From bankruptcy, he said. From losing everything because of something that happened 40 years ago. Because of me, John said quietly. His English faltered on the last word, but the meaning was clear. No, I said immediately. No, John, that's not... Practically speaking? Mark cut in. Yes. If he hadn't come back, as amazing as that is, the company would have never looked twice at the file. But now they have every legal pretext to say the payout was improper. Their lawyers will be salivating. Lisa's face had gone pale. Her hand gripped the edge of the tablecloth. Mark, stop, she whispered. Please. He didn't look. I'm not saying we don't want you here, Uncle John, he said, turning the smile on my brother. It's just, there are consequences. Financial consequences. Maybe, his eyes flicked to me. Maybe we should look into options. If he goes back to that village, I stood up so fast the chair scraped harshly against the hardwood. Enough, I said. Everyone fell silent. I will handle Pacific American, I said. I will talk to the lawyers. I will answer whatever questions they have. But my brother is not an option. He is not a problem to be solved. He is family. Dad, no one's saying, Lisa began. You're thinking it, I said. He hears it. I hear it. So I will make this very clear. John is staying. If that means I lose the house, the savings, everything, then so be it. I lived without him for almost 40 years. I will not send him back into the jungle to protect granite countertops and leased SUVs. Mark flushed. For a moment, the smooth facade cracked. With respect, sir, he said stiffly, this isn't just about you. Lisa and I have responsibilities. The kids. And I have responsibilities, I said. To my brother, to your wife's uncle, to the boy I let slip from my hands because a company put profit over safety and sent us up in a flying rust bucket. The words hung between us. John stared at his plate. Eddie stared at John. Emma stared at me. Mark's jaw clenched. He stood abruptly. Fine, he said. You do whatever you think is noble. Just remember, when the bills come due, nobility doesn't pay them. He walked out of the dining room. Lisa buried her face in her hands. I'm sorry, Dad, she whispered. He's just scared. So am I said quietly. That night, after I'd driven John home in a silence thick with unspoken things, after he'd gone to his room and closed the door, my phone buzzed on the kitchen table. A text from Emma. Grandpa, can I call? I called her. Hey, sweetheart, I said. I could hear voices in the background, the TV. Lisa's sharp syllables, Mark's lower rumble. A door closing. Grandpa, Emma whispered. Dad's mad. I know, I said. He'll cool down. No, she said fiercely. You don't understand. He's talking about you, about Uncle John. He thinks I'm in my room, but I'm in the hallway. He left the office door open a little. My hand tightened around the phone. What is he saying? I asked. She hesitated. I could almost see her biting her lip the way she did when she was nervous. He said you're selfish, she said finally, that you're going to ruin everything. He said if the insurance company takes the money back, they'll lose the house, my school, everything Mom's crying. And then he said maybe there's a way to fix it, but Mom has to be strong. My chest felt tight. Fix it how? I asked. I don't know, Emma whispered. He said he has contacts, that if Uncle John goes back or disappears, maybe they can argue it was a mistake, that they can make it go away. He said people disappear all the time. The room tilted. Emma, I said very calmly, because if I didn't speak calmly, I would start shouting and never stop. I need you to do something for me. Okay, she said, voice trembling. You go to your room, I said. Close the door. Put some music on. If your father comes in, you were studying. You didn't hear anything, do you understand? Yes. And Emma? Yeah? If you ever feel unsafe, I said, the words sticking in my throat, you call me. I don't care what time it is, I will come. Immediately. Okay, she whispered. Grandpa? Yes? Are we going to be okay? I looked down the hallway where a strip of light glowed under John's door. I thought of the jungle, of villagers finding a broken boy wrapped in nylon and blood. I thought of a gray-suited man at our kitchen table 3 decades before, sliding papers across to my mother while she stared at them with empty eyes. I don't know yet, I said honestly, but I promise you this. Whatever happens, I will not let anyone hurt your uncle. Or you. I hung up. The knot of guilt I'd carried since I was 21 twisted into something sharper. Anger. For nearly 40 years, I'd blamed myself for John's fall. I'd blamed my fingers for losing their grip, my muscles for failing, my choice of plane, my choice of company. I'd forgotten to blame the people who'd sent us into the sky. And now, my own son-in-law was calmly discussing making my brother disappear again to protect granite countertops. The jungle had taken John once I would not let my family finish the job. The next morning I drove into the city. John watched me pull on my jacket, brow furrowed. You go where? He asked. To make some things right, I said. Stay here, rest. I'll be back before dinner. He nodded slowly. Be careful, he said. Always, I lied. Pacific American's regional office was in a glass tower downtown. The lobby smelled like polished stone and conditioned air. I checked in with a receptionist whose smile left my skin cold and sat in a waiting area with chairs designed to keep people from getting comfortable. When they called my name, I followed a thin man in a navy suit down a hallway lined with framed pictures of happy families. He introduced himself as Mr. Collins. He shook my hand with a grip he'd probably practiced in the mirror. Mr. Anderson, he said, gesturing to a chair. Thank you for coming. I understand this is a sensitive situation. That's one word for it, I said. He smiled thinly, opened a file. Inside there were copies of documents I vaguely recognized from my parents' kitchen table, from the hospital, from the search. We appreciate your cooperation, he said. As our letter stated, the discovery that your brother, previously declared deceased, is in fact alive, requires us to review the validity of the original claim. Our primary goal is to ensure that no fraud was committed. By whom? I asked. By any party, he said smoothly. The policyholder, the beneficiaries, the issuing company, anyone involved. I stared at him. My parents buried an empty casket because they had no body, I said. My mother sat in our dark living room for 6 months. My father drank himself into an early grave. If there was any fraud, it wasn't theirs. Of course, Collins said quickly. We're not implying. Then who? I asked. The adventure company that owned the plane? The one that cut corners on maintenance and sent us up in a metal coffin? Because if you're looking for negligence, I would start there. His eyes flickered. Actually, he said, that's part of what we're trying to determine, which is why we need to ask, where exactly has your brother been all these years? In the jungle, I said, in a village near the crash site, with people who found him broken and speechless and decided he was worth saving. Does that sound like fraud to you? He hesitated. "We'll need to speak with him," he said finally. "You will," I said, "but not today." "Mr. Anderson." I leaned forward. "I want you to hear me very clearly," I said. "If you try to intimidate my brother, if you imply that he's somehow responsible for what happened, I will find every reporter interested in human interest stories, and I will bring them to your doorstep." The headline writes itself: "Survivor found after 39 years threatened with lawsuit by insurance giant." How do you think that will play in the news cycle? He swallowed. "We have procedures," he said stiffly. "And I have a brother who spent most of his life thinking he was unwanted and forgotten," I said. "We're done for today. You send your questions in writing. My lawyer will review them. We'll respond as appropriate." He blinked. "Your lawyer?" "Yes," I said. "Did you think I would walk in here alone?" I left before he could answer. On the sidewalk outside, the winter wind whipped around the buildings. I pulled my coat tighter, pulled out my phone. There was one person I hadn't called in years, not since I'd retired, but some ghosts come with useful skill sets. "Thomas," I said when he answered, his voice as gravelly as ever. "It's David. I need some advice, and maybe more." "David," he said slowly, "after all this time, what's happened?" "My brother came back from the dead," I said. "And my family is about to show me who they really are." He was silent for a moment. "I'm listening," he said. By the time I got home that afternoon, John was waiting for me at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee between his hands. "You talked to them," he said. "It wasn't a question." "I did?" I said, shrugging off my coat. He searched my face. "Bad?" "Not yet," I said. "But it will be. We need to be ready." "Ready for what?" he asked. "For them to decide that you're worth more dead than alive," I said quietly. He flinched. "In the village," he said after a moment, his voice distant. "When the river rises, you tie everything down. The goats, the boats, the roofs. You know some things will go. You decide what you will not let the water take." "Yes," I said. He looked up at me, those blue eyes so eerily like my own. "I am not going back," he said. "I did not walk out of that jungle to be sent away again." "Good," I said, "because I have no intention of letting you go. Not this time." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my old recliner, the one my wife had loved, the one my granddaughter curled up in to watch cartoons when she was small. The house was quiet. The city hummed outside. I stared at the ceiling and thought of hands. The hands of the villagers who had carried my brother from the forest, feeding him, cleaning him, teaching him how to speak again. The hands of the man in the gray suit, sliding papers across a table. The hands of my son-in-law, gesturing as he spoken about contacts and making things go away. In the end, I realized something simple and devastating. For 39 years, I'd been trying to pay a debt to my brother that couldn't be paid. I'd lived my life trying to be responsible, careful, generous, hoping that somewhere, somehow, the universe would count my sacrifices as penance for the day I'd let him fall. Now the universe had handed me an opportunity, not to erase the past. That was impossible, but to make a choice. To decide whose hands would shape the rest of my brother's story, my children's. Or mine. 2 days later, I invited the whole family over for Sunday lunch. I cooked myself. Roast chicken, potatoes, the way my wife used to. I even made her lemon pie, the one recipe I could never quite get right but kept trying anyway. Lisa arrived first, with Mark and the kids. My son Matthew came 10 minutes later with his own family, arms laden with bakery boxes and store-bought salad. We ate, we talked. Everyone pretended things were normal. John sat at the end of the table, shoulders slightly hunched, answering questions when asked, falling silent when conversation turned to things he didn't understand. Streaming services, social media, office politics. I waited until coffee. I met with Pacific American, I said, wiping my mouth with my napkin. They're investigating. They'll send formal questions. There's a risk they'll try to recover some or all of the payout from your grandparents' policy. Lisa's hand flew to her mouth. Matthew's fork clinked against his plate. How bad is it? Matthew asked. He'd always been the practical one. Bad enough, I said, but I've spoke to a lawyer, a good one. We have options. Mark scoffed. Options like hope they're feeling charitable? He muttered. I looked at him. Options like restructuring my assets, transferring ownership of the house, protecting what matters, I said. Which is why I wanted you all here. There are going to be changes. Changes? Lisa repeated. Yes, I said. I took a breath. For years I've assumed that when I'm gone, everything I have, this house, the savings, the investments, would go to you and your brother, I said. That was the plan your mother and I made, to help you, to make your lives easier than ours were. Lisa's eyes filled. I know, Dad, she said. We've always... But plans, I said, my voice steady, are based on assumptions, on who we think people are. Sometimes we're wrong. I turned to Emma. Sweetheart, I said, would you mind taking Eddie and your cousins to the living room? Put on a movie. This part is for the adults. She hesitated, sensing the tension, but nodded. Come on, she said, shepherding the kids out. She glanced back at me once, worry etched in her young face. When they were gone, I folded my hands on the table. I know about your conversation the other night, I said, looking at Mark. About your contacts. About making things go away. Lisa's head snapped toward him. What conversation? She demanded. He went pale. Dad's twisting things, he said quickly. I was just venting. You know how I get when I'm stressed. No, I said. You were making plans. To eliminate the problem your uncle's survival presents. To make my brother disappear. Again. Lisa shook her head slowly. Mark, tell me he's lying. He opened his mouth, closed it, his eyes hardened. Look, he said, this is ridiculous. I was brainstorming, worst-case scenarios. That's what I do at work. We run hypotheticals, risk assessments. I never said I was actually going to do anything. You said people disappear all the time, I said. You said Lisa had to be strong. You said you had contacts. You said you could fix it. He glared at me. You're taking this totally out of context, he snapped. Matthew cleared his throat. Is this true? He asked quietly. Did you say those things? Mark's jaw clenched. I was protecting my family, he said. Someone has to. Dad's ready to martyr himself and drag us down with him. Someone has to think about the kids. The kids, I repeated. Is that what you call the people whose grandfather you planned to bankrupt? Lisa burst into tears. Stop, she sobbed. Just stop. I will, I said, after I finish explaining the changes. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a folded document, set it on the table. This is the first draft of my new will, I said. It's not finalized yet. My lawyer is still making adjustments, but the core is here. Mark's eyes narrowed. What are you doing, Dad? Lisa whispered. I am tying down what I refuse to let the flood take, I said. I looked at them, each in turn. My daughter, my son, their spouses, the people I'd spent decades helping, often at my own expense. For years I've been generous, I said. I've paid mortgages, covered debts, funded schools. When you needed help, I gave it. Gladly. Because you were my children. Because I believed we were a family. I turned to Lisa. When your first IVF cycle failed and insurance refused to cover another, who wrote that check? I asked. She swallowed. You did, she whispered. When Mark's second startup collapsed and the bank was going to take the house, who negotiated with them? Who took money from his retirement account to keep your roof? I asked. You, she said, tears spilling. I turned to Matthew. When your back surgery left you out of work for 8 months, who kept your business afloat? I asked. You did, he said, voice rough. And I never asked for anything in return, I said. Except respect, honesty, basic decency. I looked at Mark. And you, I said. You repaid that by calculating the value of my brother's life against your hardwood floors. He opened his mouth to protest. I held up a hand. I'm not finished, I said. I unfolded the document, slid it so they could all see the headings. This new will establishes a trust, I said. The bulk of my assets, the house, the savings, the investments, will go into that trust. The primary beneficiaries will be John and your children, not you. Lisa stared at me. Dad, she whispered, you can't. I can, I said, and I am. Each of you will receive a modest sum, enough to be comfortable, to cushion emergencies, but not enough to rely on. Not enough to build a life of entitlement on someone else's labor. The majority will be managed by a trustee I trust. It will be used for John's care, for his future, and for your children's education. Not for your vacations, not for your club memberships, not for Mark's next big opportunity. Mark stood abruptly, his chair toppling backward. This is insane, he shouted. You can't do this. After everything we've sacrificed. Sacrificed? I repeated softly. What exactly have you sacrificed, Mark? Your dignity, maybe? When you decided that plotting to make my brother disappear was an acceptable brainstorming exercise. He glared at me, breathing hard. You don't understand how the world works, he spat. You're old, naive. Companies like Pacific American. I understand more than you think, I said. I understand contracts. I understand leverage. I understand that legally neither you nor Lisa is entitled to a cent of my estate. Anything I give you is a gift, and gifts can be withheld. Lisa sobbed harder. Dad, please, she choked. We're scared, that's all. We're just scared. So am I said. I am scared every time John wakes up screaming. I am scared every time he sees a plane in the sky and flinches. I am scared when I think of the decades he lost, but I have never once considered that his absence would have been more convenient. Silence fell. Outside, a siren wailed faintly. You will receive a copy of the finalized will when it's done, I said. In the meantime, consider this your notice. The days of assuming my bank account is your safety net are over. You will stand on your own feet or you will fall. That is your choice. I stood. Lunch is over, I said. John and I have somewhere to be. Where? Matthew asked. To talk to someone who might finally pay what they owe, I said. We left them there, sitting around the table, staring at the papers. In the hallway, Emma waited, pretending to look at a family photo. She looked up when we passed. Are you okay? She whispered. I touched her cheek. I will be, I said. Keep your head down for a while, sweetheart. Things are going to be loud. She nodded, eyes big. Love you, Grandpa, she said. Love you more, I said. John and I stepped out into the cold air. Where we go? He asked, pulling his borrowed coat tighter around his shoulders. To see an old friend, I said. The kind who knows where the bodies are buried, and how to make sure the right people pay for putting them there. Thomas met us in his office, smaller than the one he'd had before retirement, but still lined with shelves of legal volumes and framed certificates. He listened as I told the story from the beginning. The jump, the fall, the jungle, the letter, the insurance, the conversation Emma had overheard. There were parts where my voice broke, parts where I had to stop and breathe, parts where John reached out and put his hand over mine. When I finished, Thomas sat back in his chair, steepling his fingers. Jesus, David, he said softly, when you called and said your brother came back, I thought you meant metaphorically. Counseling, sobriety, Something like that. Not literally. Life is messy, I said. He nodded. Well, he said, good news first. Pacific American has a problem. Their policy likely contained language about presumed death. If their investigator and the local authorities signed off on the death certificate based on the evidence at the time, and no fraud was involved, their ability to claw back funds is limited, especially after this much time. Statutes of limitations, laches, all that. In English? I asked. In English, he said, they can harass you. They can make your life unpleasant with letters and threats. But actually making you repay everything? Unlikely. Unless there's something you haven't told me. There isn't, I said. Good, he said. Now for the other part. The adventure company. He turned to his computer, typed, clicked. His brow furrowed. Here we are, he muttered. SkyQuest Adventures. Incorporated 1979. Defunct after the accident. Reincorporated under a different name 2 years later, New Horizons Outdoor Experiences. Then acquired by Expeditionary Holdings, LLC in 2003. And who owns Expeditionary Holdings? Ah, there he is, Timothy Harrington. The name hit me like a slap. Harrington, I repeated. As in Harrington Air? The same, he said. He's built quite an empire: adventure tourism, private charters, insurance subsidiaries. He probably forgot all about that little company he bought 4 mergers ago. Doesn't change what happened, I said. My hands were shaking. No, Thomas said. It doesn't. And if you're up for it, we might be able to remind him. Especially now that your brother is here to testify about maintenance practices, safety briefings, or lack thereof. There may be a negligence claim. Maybe more, depending on what internal memos we can find. Companies like that have skeletons. We just have to open the right closets. John looked between us. You can make them pay? He asked slowly. Thomas studied him. Maybe not enough to make up for what they took, he said honestly. Nothing can, but enough to hurt them. Enough to get their attention. Enough to set you up if we play it right. I thought of Mark's face when I'd told him about the trust, the way his hands had clenched, empty of anything to hold on to. Yes, I said quietly. Let's hurt them. The next months were a blur of depositions, letters, meetings. Pacific American sent their questions. Thomas drafted our answers. John sat through interviews with a therapist, a neurologist, an anthropologist. His story, once scattered across the dark corners of his memory, began to knit into a coherent narrative. He remembered being found by villagers who thought he was a spirit at first, his pale skin and broken body an omen. He remembered the slow return of language, first in their tongue, then in Spanish. He remembered a man from the adventure company visiting the village once, years after the crash, offering money if they'd sign papers saying they'd never seen a foreigner. They threw him out, John said. Said the forest chooses who it gives back. He tried to say the plane was not his fault. They laughed at him, but I began to remember his face. We showed that face to Thomas. That's Harrington, he said, tapping the old photo of the adventure company's owner. You're sure? John nodded. I never forget his eyes, he said. Thomas smiled without humor. Excellent, he said. While he worked the legal angles, I worked on the family angles. I finalized the trust. Signed the papers in a small conference room, John at my side, Emma sitting quietly in the corner, swinging her feet. You understand this, Emma? I asked her. You'll be one of the beneficiaries, but not your parents, not directly. She nodded. I don't care about money, she said. I just don't want Dad to make Uncle John go away. I swallowed. He won't, I said. I won't let him. And if something happens to me, this paper right here, I tapped the document, make sure he can't, ever. She smiled, a small, fierce thing. Good, she said. At home things were strained. Lisa called less often. When she did, her tone was brittle. "You've put us in an impossible position," she said one evening. "You're still in your house, aren't you?" I asked. "The kids still go to their fancy school?" "For now," she said. "But if Pacific American, if they do anything more than send letters, Thomas will handle it," I said. "In the meantime, maybe you and Mark could consider living within your means." "Our means," she said bitterly, "used to include my father's generosity. Your father's generosity is now being used to repair a wrong that was done before you were born," I said. "Consider it delayed justice." Mark didn't speak to me at all if he could help it. He started avoiding family gatherings. When he had to show up, for birthdays, holidays, he was polite, distant. He avoided looking at John. He talked loudly about market trends and smart investments. One night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, I found John sitting in the dark living room, the TV off, the city's glow painting lines across his face. "You regret bringing me here?" he asked without preamble. The question hit me like a physical blow. "No," I said immediately. "Never." "Your family," he said. "They break because of me." "They were already cracked," I said. "You just made the fractures visible." He looked at his hands. "In the village," he said slowly, "when a pot breaks, you can throw it away. Or you can repair it with gold, make the cracks a part of the story more beautiful." I thought of my children, of Mark's cold calculations, of Lisa's tears, of Emma's quiet bravery. "I don't know if there's enough gold in the world for some of these cracks," I admitted, "but I'm willing to try, with the ones who want to be whole." He nodded. "And the ones who don't?" he asked. I met his eyes. "I won't break myself for them anymore," I said. The lawsuit against Harrington moved faster than I expected. Maybe it was the media pressure. Thomas had quietly tipped off a reporter about the human interest angle. Lost in the jungle for nearly 40 years. Brother returns to demand justice. The story went viral in days. People loved the photographs: John sitting on my front steps, sunlight in his hair. John holding Emma's hand in the park. Me, old and stern, my hand on his shoulder. They loved less the details that came out in the legal filings' old maintenance logs. Lost, but recovered. Emails, discovered in a forgotten server where Harrington had dismissed safety concerns as overblown. A memo where he'd suggested that adventurous ambiance mattered more than tedious compliance. The public did not like that at all. Harrington tried to settle quietly at first. A lowball offer couched in sympathetic language. Thomas laughed when he saw the number. "They think you're desperate," he said. "Let's disabuse them of that notion." In the end, after months of back and forth, after a mediation session where I watched Harrington's lawyer's face turn progressively more pinched, they offered something different. A public apology. A scholarship fund in John's name for underprivileged kids from South America to study aviation safety. And more money than I had ever seen in my life. Not lottery money. Not enough to buy islands or yachts. But enough. Enough to pay Pacific American back every cent they claimed we owed, if it came to that. Enough to guarantee John's care for the rest of his life. Enough to secure Emma's education, and that of her cousins, if the trust's investments somehow failed. Enough to make Mark's eyes gleam when he heard about it. Because, of course, he heard. The settlement details weren't fully public, but numbers leak, people talk. He showed up at my house the day after the agreement was signed. He didn't call first, he just walked in, the way he always had, as if my home were an extension of his. I was in the kitchen, making tea. John was in the backyard with Emma, practicing the slow, careful English phrases she taught him. Mark's footsteps were sharp on the hardwood. "Congratulations," he said, leaning in the doorway, arms crossed. "You finally found your pot of gold." I didn't turn. "I found accountability," I said. "The gold is just a side effect." He snorted. "Call it what you want," he said. It's money. And now that you're rolling in it, maybe we can revisit this whole disinheriting your kids nonsense. I set the kettle down. What do you want, Mark? I asked. He uncrossed his arms, stepped into the kitchen. What I've always wanted, he said, for this family to be secure, for my children to not have to worry about college or housing or health care, for you to stop pretending that punishing Lisa for my words is some kind of noble stand. Punishing Lisa? I repeated. Is that how you see it? How else should I see it? He asked. She's your daughter. She's done nothing but love you, support you, stand by you, and you're going to leave her with scraps because you're mad at me. I turned. She stood by you, I said. When you talked about making my brother disappear, she cried, yes. But she didn't tell you to stop. She didn't call me. Emma did. Your 12-year-old daughter had more moral clarity than both of you combined. His jaw flexed. She was scared, he said. We both were. People say things when they're scared. People also reveal themselves when they're scared, I said. He sighed as if dealing with a difficult client. Look, he said, we can argue philosophy all day, or we can talk business. You've got, what, a couple million now? I stared at him. Let's say you do what you plan, he continued. Set up your precious trust for John and the grandkids. Fine. You still have to manage it, invest it, make sure it doesn't get eaten by inflation or bad decisions. That's where I come in. My stomach turned. You want to manage the trust, I said, after everything. He smiled thinly. I know markets, he said. I know opportunities. And as much as you might resent me, we are still family. Who else would you rather have overseeing things? Some stranger in a suit who sees you as an account number? Or your own son-in-law who has skin in the game? Emma's laughter floated in from the yard. I pictured Mark's skin in the game. My brother's life weighed against interest rates. No, I said. He blinked. No, he repeated. No, I said, you will not manage the trust. You will not advise on investments. You will not have access to a single cent of this settlement. Ever. His face reddened. You're being emotional, he snapped. Short-sighted. You think you're protecting them, but you're not. You're setting them up for failure. No, I said. I'm setting them up to live without believing they're entitled to bailouts. That's not failure. That's freedom. He stepped closer. You're making a mistake, he said, voice low. One day you'll regret this. Maybe, I said. But if I err, I will err on the side of protecting the man who fell out of the sky because someone like Harrington cut corners. I will err on the side of the granddaughter who called me in tears. I will err on the side of the part of my conscience that survived watching my brother disappear into the clouds, not on the side of your lifestyle. He stared at me for a long moment. You know what? He said finally. Do whatever you want, but when you're gone and the dust settles, don't be surprised if your precious grandkids come knocking, wondering why you decided their parents weren't worth trusting. He turned on his heel and left. I followed him to the front door. Mark, I called. He paused on the porch. You're right about one thing, I said. One day the kids will come knocking. They'll have questions, and I will have left them something much more valuable than money. Oh? He said sarcastically. What's that? The truth, I said. In writing, signed and witnessed, about what happened here, about what you suggested, about what you valued, so they can decide as adults who deserves their trust. His face drained of color. You wouldn't, he said. I already have, I said. Emma from the yard called, Grandpa, look! I turned. She and John were by the fence, pointing at a cardinal in the tree. The bird glowed red against the gray branches. When I looked back, Mark was gone. Life settled into a new kind of normal after that. Pacific American, faced with the optics of suing a man who'd spent 39 years in the jungle, quietly dropped their threats. There was some legalese about mutual release of claims and no admission of liability. I signed where Thomas told me to sign. Harrington's apology aired on national morning shows. He read from a prepared statement, eyes scanning the teleprompter, voice heavy with rehearsed contrition. "I failed in my duty to ensure the safety of my customers," he said. "For that, I am deeply sorry." John watched, expression unreadable. "Do you believe him?" I asked when it was over. "No," John said simply. "Neither do I," said. "But we took his money. That, at least, is honest." The scholarship fund launched 6 months later. The first recipients sent letters. Kids from villages like the one that had saved my brother, now studying engineering, aviation, law. John kept their photos in a small album. Sometimes he'd sit at the kitchen table and flip through it, his finger tracing their faces. "Good," he'd say. "They will make the sky safer." As for my children, the distance remained. Matthew, slowly, began to come around. He apologized, awkwardly, one afternoon when we were alone. "I should have stood up to Mark," he said, "when he said those things, when he pushed Lisa." "Yes," I said. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know," I said. We weren't healed. Not completely, but there were cracks filled with something like gold. Lisa and I spoke. Not often. Not easily. Sometimes she called in tears. "Mark says you poisoned Emma against us," she sobbed once. "I didn't have to," I said. "She was in the hallway. She heard you. Children see more than we think." "I was scared," she said. "I still am." "So am I said. "But fear doesn't excuse everything." Silence. "Is there any way back?" she whispered. "For you?" I said. "Yes, if you choose it. For him? I don't know." She didn't like that answer, but it was the only honest one I had. Emma, on the other hand, spent more and more time at my house. She helped John with his English, with his email, with the tablet the occupational therapist recommended he use to stimulate cognitive function. She taught him how to play simple games. He taught her how to weave bracelets from colored thread, a skill he'd learned in the village. One evening, the three of us sat on the porch, the sun sinking behind the row houses. John was telling a story about the time the village's goat had fallen into a pit trap, gesturing animatedly. Emma laughed, leaning against my shoulder. "This is my favorite place," she said suddenly. I looked at her. "Why?" I asked. "Because here," she said, "we're not pretending." I swallowed. "I'm sorry you had to grow up so fast," I said. She shrugged, a small, sad smile on her face. "Sometimes people fall," she said. "Sometimes they get back up. Sometimes they don't. You can't hold on for them." I looked at John, at the sling that had once cradled my broken shoulder, at the hands that had reached for mine in the screaming wind. "You hold on as long as you can," I said, "and when you can't anymore, you live with what's left." Emma slipped her hand into mine. "You did," she said. Maybe I had. When I think back now, an old man in a body that complains about stairs and weather changes, a grandfather watching his granddaughter apply to universities, a brother drinking morning coffee across from me at the kitchen table, I see my life in two parts: before the fall and after the letter. The guilt never fully leaves, neither does the anger, but something else sits with them now. Choice. I couldn't save my brother from the plane. I couldn't stop the jungle from taking 39 years. But when the world tried to take him from me again, this time with polite words and legal threats and the soft cruelty of convenience, I held on. With both hands. Until something else broke. Not my grip, not my shoulder, but the illusion that family is always a safe place. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes the people who share your blood will weigh your life against their comfort and choose the latter. When that happens, you have a choice of your own. You can keep bleeding for them, or you can step back. Tie down what matters. Let the flood take the rest. In the end, revenge wasn't screaming or lawsuits or public humiliation. It was something quieter. I took the wealth built on my brother's presumed death and turned it into the foundation of his new life. I took the inheritance my children had assumed was theirs and placed it in the hands of the man they had once written off as an old mistake, and the grandchildren who still knew how to love without calculating. I left the ones who valued money over people with exactly what they had chosen: themselves. And every morning when I wake, I hear the kettle whistle, I smell coffee. I hear John humming a song from the village, off-key and content, as he slices bread at the counter. Sometimes he hands me a cup and says, "Another day, hermano. We are still here." And I nod. Because for 39 years, that was the only miracle I ever truly wanted.
My grandpa's words really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales stories like this, hit subscribe.